कलाप्रदर्शिनी 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 कलाप्रदर्शिनी
तत्तुम 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 तत्तुम
कलाप्रदर्शिनी.
Hello. Namaste. Good evening to everyone. Welcome to the Earth series. And we wish and hope all of you are doing well in today's pandemic situation in India and across the world. As you might have seen, the topic of discussion is around the love of life-centered learning to as many families and workspaces as she can. Thank you so much for being able to join us today and discuss these topics.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Okay. And hello, can you hear?
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
We can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. And we are very happy to meet you three. Yeah, we are very happy to meet all three experts. Today's topic is going to be very delicate and sensitive, emotional. We are not here to talk about the caste or political issues. Whether it is a male child or a female child, it is a global and social problem. How do we handle and what is the solution and protection? What and how to identify abuse? What are different types of abuse? Some causes and examples? What sort of resolution is expected in this? Dr. Ashwin, can you just explain?
Thank you so much, ma'am, for having me join this panel and also importantly choosing this particular topic for the discussion. I think violence and abuse is so prevalent, but then the discussion on these topics and ways to prevent these menaces are not as much discussed as one must. So you asked me, a couple of things in that question. One, what are the different forms of abuse? And then how do we identify it, and also what types of the resolutions could we be seeking? So let me structure my response the accordingly. So the first and foremost, let's talk about what are the different forms of abuse, and then maybe I'm going to contextualize it to child sexual abuse. Now, if you are looking at abuse as a word, for me, all the day to day violations to violence, everything could come under the umbrella term of abuse. Now, looking at the various dimensions of abuse, usually we can categorize it into 6 different forms. There could be 6 different forms of interpersonal abuse. When I say interpersonal abuse, the abuse that can take place between two individuals in any context, be it in families, be it in public. I think there are 6 different the dimensions. Now, the first dimension is what is usually known as the physical abuse. A child can also become a victim of physical abuse, and in domestic violence, physical abuse is so rampant. So, the first form of abuse is physical abuse. The second form of abuse is sexual abuse. That's something that goes far beyond physical abuse. Sexual abuse could also be contact form and non-contact form. So what it means is it need not always include touch, right? It could also be in the manner in which somebody speaks to the other person, talking about something so explicitly sexual and then exploitative. There may not be contact there, there is no touch there, and yet it could be considered abuse. So, therefore, sexual abuse can be broadly categorized into contact and non contact forms of abuse. Then there are 4 more forms of abuse. The third one could be considered as verbal abuse. The manner in which we talk, that in itself could be abusive. Then there could also be emotional abuse. Say, for example, all of us might have heard of gaslighting, wherein a person talks to the other person in such a way that it demoralizes the other person. And this can happen in any context. It could happen between a teacher and a student, between couples, between friends, between colleagues. So, emotional abuse is also something that we must be paying attention to. Then the last two forms of abuse are financial abuse. Usually it takes place in the context of intimate partner violence, financial abuse coming in the way of somebody's financial independence. Yeah. Finally, I'm summarizing it. Finally, we could also be looking at technological abuse. Now, when I say technological abuse, what it means is, being abusive through using the mediums of technology. Say for example, today there is something called as revenge porn. Say for example, two people were in a relationship, they had a breakup. Somebody who's so angry about the breakup is now broadcasting their intimate pictures. Why cannot shouldn't we be considering this to be a form of abuse? On one hand, it's sexual abuse as well as using the medium of technology, so it becomes technological abuse. So as an introduction to this particular discussion, I've talked to all of you about how interpersonal relationship, be it in any context, there could be 6 different forms of abuse. Now, talking about child sexual abuse in particular, now in our country, there is this misconception that child sexual abuse means we need to begin and end our discussion with good touch, bad touch, safe touch, unsafe touch. What I'm saying is that's a very, very good concept, but it's not comprehensive. The reason being, let me ask this question to all our, the viewers. Let's say a child is bathing and somebody looks at the child. Voyeurism, right? Is that not child sexual abuse? It is, both psychologically, the kind of impact it has on the child negatively and legally. Or let's say somebody calls a child and begins to talk in a sexually explicit manner. Is that not child sexual abuse? But in both these examples that I gave, is there bad touch? There isn't. But that does not make it not child sexual abuse. They are also forms of child sexual abuse. Or for that matter, making a child watch porn, it is child sexual abuse, but is there unsafe touch? There isn't. But then that is also child sexual abuse. Or what is today called as sexting. Texting we know, but sexting is sending explicit messages, sexual content to a child. There is no bad touch, unsafe touch there. But that does not mean it's not child sexual abuse. So, therefore, for all our viewers, I'm encouraging you, let's go beyond the stereotypical discussion on child sexual abuse, only keeping in mind contact forms of abuse where there is touch. We must talk about it, no doubt about it, but what we must also empower our children is talking to them about non-contact form of abuse, where it is sexual abuse, but it does not necessarily include touch. Now, why am I emphasizing on non-contact forms of abuse? It's because several abusers, child sexual offenders, I'm not saying all, but several abusers take children through a process called grooming. They groom children. What it means is they prepare children for more intense forms of sexual abuse. They maybe begin with non contact forms of abuse. Maybe they are making the child watch porn or sending a child some messages. And the child does not take it as dangerous because there is no touch there. And the child thinks, okay, maybe it's all happening by chance. And then what the abuser could do is they may trick the child, induce guilt in a child, abuse the child sexually. When I say sexually, contact forms of abuse, and then begin to blackmail the child. This entire process is called grooming. So, therefore, in order to equip our children and even the community at large to be able to prevent child sexual abuse, we need to talk both about contact forms of child sexual abuse. That means where there is touch, molestation to rape. All of it is contact based, as well as non contact forms of abuse. Yeah. So, this is in general, the various forms of abuse. Now, if you're asking me, what are the warning signs? What are the warning signs of child sexual abuse? Because let's say, as an example, if 10 children are sexually abused, will all 10 children open up and tell their parents or teachers that I'm being sexually abused? That won't happen. Instead, each child might be behaviorally or might be displaying some warning signs which we as adults must observe. At my foundation, Mukta Foundation, we've listed 25 different warning signs. What it means is, even when a child is not talking, directly telling somebody that, look, this is what I've gone through, the child might be displaying certain behaviors. Now, I know for the paucity of time, maybe I'll speak about three or four to just give an idea of how these warning signs would look like. Say, for example, there is something called selective mutism. What is selective mutism? A child was very comfortable talking to everyone. Suddenly, because of the kind of experience and the child sexual abuse that he or she has undergone, the child might suddenly go mute, not wanting to talk to anyone. For all you know, there is blackmail that's happening. If it's a teacher, in all likelihood, the teacher might be blackmailing the child, or it could be anybody for that matter. So, selective mutism could be a warning sign. Or, say, for example, a child who's relatively very, very calmer is now displacing all the anger that the child has on the abuser onto somebody else. What can imagine it's a 6 year old child? What can the 6 year old child do to express anger towards the abuser? Nothing much. But the child could possibly displacing all the anger maybe on the parents, maybe on the siblings. There are instances where pets are killed by children who are sexually abused as a way to vent out their anger, or their favorite toy they're throwing as a way to release their anger. So you see, displacement of anger could be a warning sign. Or the third, it could also be, what is usually considered as being very secretive about their belongings. Maybe somebody has given them gifts, especially where poverty is, dominant. An abuser might use that as an opportunity to gain access into the life of a child, giving gifts, money. And these children, they could then become excessively secretive about their belongings. They don't want anybody to go near their bag, for all you know, because there is gifts inside. That can be a warning sign. The other warning sign could also be extreme clinginess. Mummy, please don't go anywhere leaving me. They're not telling I'm getting abused, but then telling that you cannot leave me anywhere. 6:30, come back. That these are all indirect ways that the child could give us warning signs. Or sometimes there could actually be marks on the body. I know of examples where there are scratches on the body of the child. Parents see it and they neglect it, thinking maybe children in their fight, they have got scratches. Or maybe there are pinch marks and parents mistake that maybe it's a mosquito bite. How is it that, all the adults are not getting bitten by the mosquito, only children are getting bitten? Sometimes, even when there are warning signs, we overlook. So, therefore, I'm strongly recommending and suggesting all the viewers, let us be aware of warning signs so that even when a child does not open up and talk, we know that there are certain warning signs so that we can contact the child and then ask the child what's going on. Hmm? The last part, and there are so many warning signs, I'm limiting here, thinking that I've given a glimpse of an idea as to how to think in terms of warning signs. The last part of what Parvati ma'am asked me was, what are the kind of resolutions we need to be looking at? Hmm? I think, this is something that my, life's ambition, which is, I think the resolution must be threefold. One is we need to be looking at the legal resolution, you know and we need to be looking at the psychological resolution. When I say psychological resolution, a survivor of abuse, did he or she have a closure? When I say closure, it's difficult to gain closure, but then what contribution did we do in order to promote their mental health after they have been through what they have been through? And also we need social resolution, meaning, imagine a child is abused and the child, you know is still in the school, and rightly so. Maybe after seeking medical treatment, or so the child is in the school. What is the kind of treatment the immediate society is giving the child? The child has to be understood in the context of what he or she has been through. So therefore the resolution has to be threefold: legal, psychological, as well as social. And I think with this, I'll stop here, and then maybe we could take questions if there are any.
Sure. Thank you so much for that introduction. It was, I would say, it was very enlightening that abuse can be defined in so many different categories. And I think once we identify the problem, analyze the root cause, I think then coming to a solution, I think, is fairly quicker. And I think one of the most important points, I think legal and the other point, the second point that you said was relatively straightforward. But the social aspect, I think this is where I feel that there's a lot of trouble, because there is no acceptance. The first thing that I think we should do collectively is, if someone is coming with a complaint, we should acknowledge. And then you go to Ashwini ji, I'm not able to hear you now.
Now, sir, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, now I can hear. Yeah. So I think one of the key questions in the societal aspect is there an educational aspect to it? Why aren't children taught at schools about all these topics? Why is it that we have to go have an NGO to do this? Why should we have other companies do this? Why as a NGO, why isn't this taught as a fundamental, basic educational fact? Is there something for that? Or is at least the government or the curriculum working towards it?
I think I personally feel that safety skills should become, very much an intrinsic part of life skills. A lot of work is now being done in the domain of life skills. And I really think safety skills, and in that, we need to be talking about child sexual abuse. We need to now be talking about cyber safety. And when you are asking me, are there efforts being done? Right now on our panel, I think Aishwarya and Sudalini, the kind of contribution that they have made in terms of bringing out that book called Safe Over Sorry. Just imagine what kind of impact it would have on the lives of children if these books are made mandated. Maybe it could be like a 5-hour course or 3-hour course or even 2-hour course, wherein using that book children are taught. And I think maybe Aishwarya and Sudalini must speak about the book that they have written in this context on child safety.
Yes, exactly, and that's why we actually have them on today's discussion itself. So Sudalini ji and Aishwarya ji, can you tell us, you come up with your book Safe Over Sorry, which is primarily a way of, I wouldn't call it educating the child, but enlightening the child and the parents who are going through this exercise-based approach to identify the problem. First, they should realize that they are being abused in the first place. So can you walk us through your journey? And also as parents, you guys, your resume already said that your children were your pioneers or your focal points while you were going about creating this. So can you share your experience on this? And you would have gone through a lot of work, research to come up with this, right? Can you share those experiences? I'm sure you probably had a lot of trauma just, listening to those stories, and then put that in a way of teaching.
Yeah. So Mohinder, I'm glad that first of all you're taking the time to do something like this, because like you rightly said, this is a product of pain more than anything else, and I realized it the most after I had my daughter, and I'm sure I can say the same about Sudan. She'll share her pain before we started this project. SO has really started as a project, and Ashwini ma'am was probably amongst the first few people to even hear our idea. One sort of very important thing which I want to state is our childhood has been rough in so many ways. A few of us choose to talk about it. Some of us choose not to talk about it. But I can say that there were dents in my own childhood caused by various psychological and other external factors. There were people who caused a lot of pain, but I did not know what to talk, who to go to. I did not have a trusted circle I can talk to, and in turn it could show in other ways. Maybe I turned out to be something else. My childhood could have been far better. But I realized all this in hindsight after I had my daughter. I actually didn't think much about it even through teenage or after that, but it hit me real hard once I had my own daughter. Right, that's when it hit me real hard. And safe over sorry is basically a very, very tough message. One thing which I always say in some of our launch shows as well is, it's like, you can talk about a very deep topic to a 40-year-old. It's perfectly an easy thing to do. You can go sit and play with a 5-year-old. That's an easy thing to do. But SOS, there is an imbalance. You have a super deep topic and your audience is 5-year-old. Even though you make it parent led, you're going to talk about a very, very delicate topic to somebody who just wants to play and have fun. Right, how do you talk, how do you make the messaging? And the one thing that Sudha and I are always particular about is, we don't want to paint the picture of the world to be a very bad place, a very scary place. We've kept that as our mantra through the book. I don't know if you got a chance to take a look at the book. So we've tried our level best to make sure that the world doesn't look scary to the child, right? Because there is still a lot of goodness left in the world, and we firmly believe in that. So those are the fundamental pillars with which I work. And one point I'd like to say to what Ashwini ma'am just said and to Parvati auntie's question is, from a resolution perspective, if people could put in some funding, some money into a project like what Ashwini ma'am is doing or what we are doing, not for anything else. Today, for example, I want to build a world-class simulation technologically and make a scenario-based safety simulation that a child can take. I choose a character, I become, I wear a cape, I pick up my whatever, a superhero thing, and I go through different levels of a simulation. As a learning and development professional, I've had the opportunity to design some of the best leadership simulations for corporates. But you know what? Your leadership simulations are great. You're talking to a 45-year about a good to have skill. I'm talking to you about a 5-year-old who has a must have skill in the simulation, but no money is being put into it. Right, you need to be really big already to be funded into something like this to do some good. So my appeal would be, from a resolution perspective, people have to give this a must have attitude. It still is a optional thing for some vague reason. So the day it moves from optional to mandatory, there is hope. So with that, I'll leave it for Sudha to continue the rest of the story.
Sudhalini ji, for the question I would like to specifically ask you is, how, now that you figured, like, okay, there is a problem and now you found a way to actually, communicate that problem, how would organizations or institutions react? Or like, what would you expect a school or a company or say an institution like us, what should we implement? Because right now there's no guideline. All these are new things coming up and we need to react to these, and we want to take the right steps. I'm sure like everybody is now, especially with the news happening, with prominent schools in Chennai coming up, what should institutions or organizations be doing? Like, I know they came up with the ICC, but then like the head of the ICC was also, so what are there any concrete steps that have been identified?
Thanks, Mohinder. So let me just start by saying this is not new for society, right? This is something that happens across the world. This is not new in India. This is not new in schools or in organizations. We have laws around it. The country has actually, there is an act for if it happens, if sexual harassment happens in the workplace, which is called POSH, and there is an act if it happens in a school for children, which is called POPSO. So it's not like we don't have rules and regulations. There are very clear guidelines that the government has stated. Having said that, what we are very comfortable as a society doing is to avoid discussing this, because we believe that we should stay far away from it. I think the sad thing about it is, in so many cases, and in majority of cases, child abuse goes unreported. and children are suffering, in silence, because in many cases the perpetrator is most often known to the family, right, or known to the child. So I think for us it's about changing that narrative. And how do we change that narrative? I think there are three things. Step one, clearly there needs to be, whether it's a school, whether it's an organization, and for the purpose of this discussion, let's talk about where children are involved, right? So schools or play schools or any after school centers or anywhere wherever there's a child. So there is a law. So how do you make that law sort of function, something that you can practically implement? You need policies, you need processes. Many a time you've got schools that probably have it in, on paper, but are they really just sort of putting it there as a check in the box? Perhaps. So should we be looking at it being actually implemented? For example, saying that, you set up CCTV cameras and you've got them all around the school is of no use if a school is allowing a stranger to walk in without an authorized pass. You need clear guidelines, for example, for pick up and drop. When a child in a large school, and I'm sure all of us have seen this, a pick up and drop center, you've got children crowding. I mean, if a child gets lost there, who's going to go looking for the child? Where do you go looking for the child? It's too late. A CCTV camera at that point has no importance anymore, right? So what do you do? So you have a policy, but the second part of it is education. You need awareness. You need to absolutely ensure that at all levels you're educating, which means not just restricting it to making it mandatory for teachers and the staff, but parents have to go through that education process and children have to go through it. I think we strongly believe, and I think the fact that both of us, Aishwarya and I, are parents who felt very strongly that, our children need to understand this at a very young age. We need to be more aware as to how to educate them, make sure they are empowered with the right kind of skills to prevent or to at least protect themselves to the extent possible. Can we stop a perpetrator? Perhaps not, but can I at least ensure that I've done my bit to, share whatever I know with my child, to equip my child with the right kind of skills to protect himself or herself? I think that's absolutely essential. And schools today have to play that role in the process. So to answer, I think we mentioned it earlier. I think there are two things that should absolutely become mandatory in schools. Number one is personal safety awareness education. It should be mandatory. And the second, if you ask me, is mental health. I think it's becoming more and more obvious that we need to start educating children about mental health at a very young age. So I think, like I said, the second part of it is education. And then I think the third is reviews. So you can't do all of this and then say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to constantly review what's happening. We have to stay vigilant at all times. You can't suddenly just raise the red flag when an incident is reported and then there's a lot of noise in the system. There's suddenly audits happening. There's lots and lots of meetings, and then 1 month later everything is forgotten. It can't. It has to be a process. It has to go on, and we have to empower the system overall with that preventive mechanism. That's what I believe.
Thank you. I think Mrs. Parvati had a
That's
question.
very, very nice of you to explain. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah? I can't hear. Hello?
Yes,
What is the
okay.
impact on mental health and implications on future growth, Dr. Ashwini?
Sure, ma'am. I think,
Hello?
say, for example, at Mukta Foundation, what we've
Yes.
always believed is that there is an inverse relation between abuse and mental health. So, what it means is where there is abuse, where violence increases, mental health will suffer. And all our efforts to increase mental health would also contribute to prevention of the violence. So there is no denying that the mental health and discussion on abuse must go hand in hand. Now, usually I believe that when we are talking about mental health, right, we need to be looking at mental health of three parties. First, the mental health of the survivors of abuse, mental health of even the perpetrators of abuse, and then even the mental health of the witnesses of abuse. Hmm? But now let's specifically look at what are the mental health consequences of survivors of child sexual abuse. Let me broadly categorize it so that the discussion becomes structured. First and foremost, there could also be psychosomatic issues. Somatic means something to do with the body, but then that which has had its origin in the mental health. Say, for example, sometimes a child who is so stressed may frequently fall, sick because the immunity suffers. A child who's so anxious that, I've been abused and then people will get to know and there is blackmail. Imagine the kind of stress and anxiety and the trauma that the child is going through, right? So that is not just the mental health angle, but then the mental health could also make the body weak. There could be gastrointestinal issues, and I've seen it in several cases where teenagers are sexually abused. The menstrual health among adolescents also would suffer. So the first dimension when we're talking about mental health is we need to look at how the mind plays a role on the body, and collectively we are calling it as psychosomatic complaints. Somatic is bodily complaints, but that which has had its origin in the mind. So that's the first kind of impact. Now, secondly, we can exclusively look at the mental health angle. I mean, there is something called PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. What happens, it can happen to adults, it happens to children, frequent nightmares. The episode is over, but then, somebody walks and then there is a startle response. Sleep is disturbed. It's as if the same incidents are happening over and over again. Look at this. This is PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, where the child, even though the child is away from that incident, but then it's still not settled in the mind. So PTSD, it's quite common. Sometimes a lot of children can also develop what is known as externalizing mental health condition. What does externalizing mental health conditions means is some children can turn out to be so aggressive. There are some children who internalize the problem. When I say the internalize the problem, maybe they are those children who are anxious, who are depressed. But there are also children who develop externalizing problems, meaning these are kids who would throw temper tantrums. These are kids who become so aggressive. And why are they doing that? For all they are doing it as a defense mechanism. The abuser could have made them feel so powerless, but the human spirit is such that no, I still want to survive. And in that process, they could develop, aggressive tendencies and so on. And the long term mental health, the consequences are quite empty. I talked to you about selective mutism earlier. A child who is very comfortable, the talking might suddenly choose to stop. They may develop mood disorders, they may develop anxiety disorders. Yeah. So abuse and mental health, mental illnesses, they're positively correlated. The more the abuse that an individual experiences, the more chances are that they also develop mental illnesses. The third category of problems that a child who's been a victim of child sexual abuse can develop is relational problems. When I say relational problems, I mean, look at it. There are so many. I think Sudalani ma'am was rightly pointing it out. They say close to 70% of the time child sexual abuse happens, and it is done by somebody who's known. The moment we believe somebody is known, there is a degree of trust, right? And when trust is breached and abuse occurs, the child goes on to look at everybody, every human being, and every relationship as a potential threat. So, based on that sort of mistrust in the human relationship, one can only imagine the kind of unhealthy relationships people might build later on. No, so there's also a consequence on the relational health of the child. And then the fourth component, let's look at the academics and long term, even occupational. Imagine being through a childhood with abusive experiences, with psychosomatic ailments, with mental health concerns, with relational concerns, it may also have an impact on one's performance in the academics, and that may also prove to be a detrimental factor even in our occupational life. Hmm? So, therefore, broadly, we could be looking at the negative impact of child sexual abuse along these lines: psychosomatic health consequences, mental health consequences, relational health consequences, and occupational and academic. But that does not mean all children experience these negative consequences. Some children are so resilient, they bounce back healthily. And then we need to be talking about the kind of social support that the child received that made this resilient way of dealing with abuse possible. But where there is no social support, it's quite possible that, like Parvati ma'am was asking, it's quite possible that there are going to be negative consequences on all the domains, like I explained, ma'am.
Uh, Piggybacking on the same question, one of the questions I've got here
Thank
is,
you.
um, um, if you plan to touch upon the role of movies and film songs that try to normalize sexual interactions between children and adults under the garb of love has no age, and this has been normalized in today's society. The so-called celebrities themselves do all this on screen, which is shown to kids starting 3 years old. So I think what you're saying is like, my interpretation of the question is, television has a huge medium, and whatever they see on television today is highly sexualized, and it's become normal for sexual interactions between children and adults, and the hero and the heroine. Um, how is this being treated? Like, does censorship actually have a role to play with these kind of psychological issues happening? And I have my own question on this. This is not a new problem then, right? So why is it that we are hearing so much of this in the last few years? If this was prevalent, is it for so many years people just kept quiet? Is that also one of the impacts of society? Or what changed so much in society that all of a sudden we are seeing these incidents? I'm not saying it didn't happen. What I'm saying is, like, what was the shift? Like, when did it become okay? And it should be okay. So is there a link between these two societal paradigm shifts?
So, I'm just thinking aloud. One is, this is what we call disclosure of cases. No, see, sometimes in the matter of child sexual abuse, because there is an increase in the number of cases reported, does not necessarily mean now the cases have increased. So, in fact, it could also be that the child sexual abuse has happened in the past, but just that now things are coming to the light so that some intervention could be made. Hmm? On the other hand, I think the first part of what Mohinder sir was asking with respect to the media, and then how sexuality is depicted. I think it's really, there are so many layers to this particular the concern. I think first and foremost, we really need to be talking to children about the boundaries, right? Boundaries. I know in the name of entertainment, sometimes children are made to utter certain things. Children are made to, behave in a particular manner on the stage, maybe in all these the shows. But then I really think we need to review, what's happening. What can be passed off as humor? Is that really humor? Because it's a several times in all these show, a dialogue that the child tells, or something that the adult, maybe the judge or somebody, tells in a reality show or something, could be laden with inappropriate the content, but then it's passed off as humor. It's not because we don't have a sense of humor, but we need to also look at, with a sense of criticality, what's the kind of impact on the child. So therefore, I really think life skills are a must. Hmm? What's happening to those children in those reality shows, that's one thing. But if another child is looking at it, and I think as parents, we really need to, if a child has already viewed it, then we really need to make the child sit and have a discussion on it. The child made that comment. What do you think about it? This is about democratic parenting. Democratic parenting is, okay, my child saw something that I'm uncomfortable. But after that, instead of hushing the whole discussion, can we sit with the child and have a dialogue? You watched it. What were your thoughts? Could it have been avoided? And I think instead of telling children this is right, this is wrong, we need to ask children, what do you think about it? I think telling alone, then we have a child who listens and does not exercise independent thinking. So therefore the emphasis need not always be on tell children what's right and wrong. Of course we will do that, but we need to also dialogue with children, so that they also build independent thought, and even in our absence they make the decisions. So therefore the media also must be responsible. People who are watching must also be responsible. In the event that we watched, at least the dialogue that happens after that must be responsible. And I think with these three pronged approach, we could do something more at a preventive level, is what I'm thinking.
And I think the key to all this to even identify the abuse. So it goes back all the way to question number one: what is abuse? And I think that is where a lot of us, and as society keeps changing, like technology related abuses. I think back in the day, I don't know, you probably had to have a camera, but today you just have to have a small cell phone. You have button cameras and those kind of things. I think it's not a topic that you can decide today and stop today. I think it has to keep evolving as issues are identified. As a society, as responsible people, we need to first accept, because it's a very difficult topic to accept in the first place. Because I think everybody, I mean, when we were discussing, we were like, it's a touchy topic to talk about in public, and that's something we need to first break. It should not be a touchy topic. I was talking to my wife and saying, yeah, we have a girl child, and if she comes and tells us something, how would we react? How should we react? How do we identify these things? And this is not something we didn't learn this in school, not at college, not in a corporate. We know, okay, I mean, you learn with the society, and if society believes something is okay today, for all you know, we are probably doing what is okay today. But 20 years later, they could say what was done 20 years back was not right. I have one other question here, and this question is from Facebook. It says, right sex education will enable children to open up to their parents, guardians, or anyone that they trust, and open about any kind of discomfort or abuse. What are your thoughts, and how and when to start the same for our children?
Would you like one of us to jump in? Because we're very passionate about when to start.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I just want to, if I may, touch upon just one part of the previous question before I jump into this. I think that something that we all have to accept is we live in 2021, which means that most of our children are exposed to, especially given the current scenario where all of us are sitting at home, working from home, they're watching things, they're listening into conversations, adult conversations. So I think things are changing at such a fast pace. I think we need to accept reality that, children are going to know a lot. They are going to be influenced by media, because we put a device in front of them at age 3 and 4, saying, hey, sit and listen to songs and whatever shows. So when we start right there, suddenly trying to say, at age 10 and 11, oh no, but TV is bad for you, or trying to reduce it, it's contradictory, right? So I think there needs to be some sort of consistency there. And parents need to accept, because many a time I've noticed that when we have conversations with parents, sometimes they feel it won't happen to them. It can never happen in my family, in our family, it won't happen. This cannot happen. My child knows everything. He will not be watching porn. You don't know that. I mean, you can never be sure, because they live in an environment today where they're influenced by peer pressure. So So that being said, do we need to start? I think the question from Facebook was, when should we be starting? Absolutely, you need to start early. You need to have the right kind of conversations with children. Uh, Obviously, you should not scare them, but and that's really one of the things that, like Aishwarya was saying earlier, at age 4, what you tell a child versus at age 13 will be different, because what affects them is different, what they know is different, but you still need to start very early. And what's the right age? I think, just given a lot of statistics as well, between 4 and 5, you start talking to them about, feelings, touches. Do not scare them, but please do start those conversations early and keep saying it often. Normalize it for a child so they don't get nervous. And it's important that parents do it, because that's where a lot of the learning begins, right, from home. So yeah.
Thank you, Sudhalini. And there's one more question that we had for you directly on this context. Impact of the situation, environment, and context. This plays a huge thing on how something is perceived, or how the victim or the perpetrator feels. And globalization and mixed up value of misunderstood Indian values and the Western influence on today's society. It's a clash for the generation which has an open economy, open global outlook. Access to information is a lot more. While at home they're asked to behave in a certain way. While at school they're asked to behave a certain way. A simple thing: my child who's 6 years old, still in kindergarten, they had sex education not as a formal mean, but the teacher has told that class in kindergarten how a baby is formed, and literally how a baby is formed, but in a way that a 6-year-old would understand. And that's something for us as Indian parents living abroad for so many years. I mean, it was amazing for us to, you can explain something like this also to a 6-year-old to make them understand such a topic. That was eye-opening. So you have the pros and the cons, but like, how do you visualize it? I mean, when you're coming up with these books like Safe versus a Safe Over Story and other educational content, have you seen this clash of thoughts? On one side, cover up. On the other side, you're free to watch like half-clad women. Like that is a total clash. How do you deal with this?
Okay, I'm going to very quickly give it to Aishwarya, but I'll start the conversation because we keep talking about these things as well, right? So, if and parents, I'm sure a lot of the parents watching or just the kind of shows that are out there today on Netflix, for example, for teenagers, or just anybody to watch, right? Children can forget about all the controls and all of that. Children know everything about how to fix a control, how to work it. They know all of that. So, and they're talking about shows that if you ask children today what their pet topics are, it's related to a lot of the stuff that's coming from the internet, a lot of the stuff that's on social media, a lot of it that's that they're watching on shows. So, but let me flip that the other way. As parents, so there's two parts, right? There's the affluent parent who wants to send their child to a fancy school. They want their child to start talking, openly, have interesting conversations, be intelligent, all of that. But at the same time, when it comes to protecting them, when it comes to having these difficult conversations, they're not necessarily always ready and prepared for it. So what do? They go looking for a parenting class. It's not always going to be so easy, right, to go and get all your answers at a parenting class and come back. It's about having that relationship, like she talked about earlier, Dr. Ashwini, but also striking that balance. Children are going to, I mean, all of us grew up watching MTV and waiting to watch MTV and whatever we could get access to. But where did that balance come in? It's about teaching your children the difference between right and wrong as well, right? So I'm going to pass it on to Aishwarya because I know she's waiting to say something. So go ahead, Aishwarya.
We can't hear you, ma'am.
Yeah, this is an interesting clash that you just brought up, Moinder, and we face this time and again. One thing I tell myself, and I'm not talking as an expert or anything like that here, I'm just talking as a parent. And you know that I come from a multicultural home. You know that we have a multicultural background. Having said that, go back whether Indian, be Indic in your approach, be global in your approach. If you go back really to the natural basics of where we all come from, go in any angle, it still says achamillai achamillai achamenbadillai, right? Go back to however Indic it is. Call it courage, call it the courage to speak, call it your right to a certain aspect, call it consent, call it opening up to a child. All our natural basics actually suggest the same thing. We have done it in various modalities today. You know, I may be doing it as a conversation, I may be doing it as a game, Ashwini man may be doing it as a program, I may just be doing it like a card game with my child, right? But the, like you rightly said, your child got to know about a very very important and very very delicate topic in a very different modality, so it surprised you about so more than the content, the context and the modality surprised you as a parent, right? So I would suggest, I think we're all in our roots, in our basics, call it global perspectives, call it Indian values. If we really stick to our very basics of talking to our children, keeping an open mind, encouraging the child to come and talk to you. Why did they say, you know, have family meals together, eat together, spend this kind of family time together, talk about these topics? A lot of our traditions, a lot of our values have always been saying, you know, be fearless, be honest, right? A lot of our values have been saying, you know, you have the right to speak. That is what it fundamentally said. What it became later, what we are doing today, is a completely different ball game. So I usually get myself out of these clashes by thinking, what is the most natural thing to do? I always stick to what is the most natural thing to do. What is the what has a scientific base to it? So today, I'm sure Ashwini ma'am will be able to tell us how does psychology work. So we as parents, before we take up these various certifications for our office, you know, work-related promotions or anything, before we take up a 500 other list of things which we are learning, new domains, new technology, before all that, we need to sort of ask ourselves, what do we need to know to be able to talk to our child? So I certainly think just sticking to a natural mechanism, being very natural in our approach, is always one of the best things to do. You're on mute.
That's very beautifully you have spoken. And oh, I'm in mute.
No, no, you're audible now.
Hello,
We can hear you.
hello. Can you hear?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So lots of stress, fear, discomfort, everything is there. Not only for girls, even for boys, isn't it? As a artist, I would like also to join. See, we take care of the children, whoever comes to our institution. So much of care, and they are more closer to the dance gurus. They are gurus, and we treat them like they are like our children also. So much of care we take. We teach them, not only in schools, but here also we teach. We try to teach them the traditional way how to be,
Hmm.
and in such contest, I don't know, sometimes so many things happen, and we feel very delicate to speak about certain issues happening. That's what my feeling. Even everybody is very, like, even male teachers, male dancers who are gurus, and we all are in the same boat. We try to take care of our artists, that is our students. Sometimes it is difficult, I don't know how to tell, but it is so difficult to mold them up.
Absolutely.
and they're part of our family, extended family also they become. So much of discipline we
Absolutely.
try to put in, but it sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So all the three of you have spoken so well, and you have given us so much. And I hope we will try to bring out many more issues. It is not only the child abuse. There are so many things going on. In the youngsters today, their life is changing. Even after getting married, they get married and they get divorced. That is also another biggest problem. When I see my students getting into such problems, it is so it's very heavy heart.
Absolutely.
Why it is
Correct.
happening for them? Why they are not able to adjust themselves in their life? You have to talk about that also, please. Explain why these things are all happening.
Ashwini ma'am, would you like to take that?
Hello.
Sure,
Yeah.
ma'am. When ma'am was asking about how at times there could be abuse or conflicts even post marriage, I think fundamentally we need to also differentiate between conflicts and abuse. It's quite natural that in any evolving relationship there are conflicts, but then when we don't have the adequate skills to resolve the conflict, sometimes it can assume the shape and form of the abuse. So therefore we need to first ask ourselves what we see in that relationship. Is it conflict or abuse? The difference between conflict and abuse is, let's say in conflict, two people have a misunderstanding. They are unable to meet their eyes on a particular the topic. There are differences. Whereas in abuse there is a clear objective of one individual in order to dominate the other and in order to cause pain and harm. So therefore I think what we see in relationships, sometimes it could be conflicts, sometimes it could be abuse. But fundamentally, if you ask me, how can we be preventing it? Not resolving after it emerges. There needs to be legal intervention, therapy, counseling. But then how could we fundamentally prevent even conflict or abuse? I would strongly recommend, I think in all the schools, the right investment of time and energy on life skills. Life skills are an absolute must. Be it the skill of empathy, be it the skill of assertiveness, be it the skill of how to draw boundaries, set boundaries, and respect boundaries of others. These are all life skills. So in fact, for an earlier question that Mohinder had asked, I think based on a Facebook question regarding sex education, what I would strongly recommend is, see, sex education should be part of what is known as sexuality education. you know in sexuality education we understand about our bodies. We need to understand about our gender and sexual identities, and then we need to also understand about how do we build healthy relationships. And then as the fourth component, we need to be talking about reproductive processes and health. And fifth, we need to talk about abuse, sexual abuse. So, therefore, sex education alone won't resolve the problem. Instead, when sex education is part of sexuality education, maybe we have a high probability of us preventing these problems. Better still, the sexuality education must be implicit in life skills education. Instead of looking at it as topical approach. Topical means 8th standard we will teach them this. That's what happens in our country. In 8th standard for 1 hour, or 10th standard for 1 hour, we teach certain topics. That's not the right model. Topical approach. Instead, what we really must do is have what is known as concentric circle model. Do you all remember concentric circles that maybe in our geometry class we might have heard? Concentric circles. What happens in a concentric circle? As we go, the radius of the circle increases. No? Similarly, what we need to do is we need to start life skills, in that maybe safety skills and all of that, with smaller radius. First standard kid, little information. Second standard kid, more. let the radius and the depth of information keep on increasing. But these are topics that we must visit time and again. So, based on what Parvati ma'am asked, how do we prevent interpersonal conflicts, people, divorce, separation, violence, all of that? Maybe the answer could be in the concentric circle model of teaching children life skills. Teaching children boundaries, consent, respect, trust, you name it, all of it are part of life skills. I think let's remember concentric circle model. Let us increase the radius, and then it's a lifelong lesson.
If I can just sort of add one bit
Please.
in it, I think, ma'am, that's phenomenal because
Yeah.
I think it's so crucial, right? Um, if I can just say that I think that parents also have a big part to play there. I think because putting all that pressure only on the schools is not entirely possible. I think value education begins at home. It has to be repeatedly, children have to be reminded. Those conversations don't just stop with moral science classes or schools running it, like ma'am said. It has to happen regularly, and I think if it's through whichever form that works for families, whichever form, meaning it could be open conversation, dialogue. It could be in some families they do it through using prayer. It could be some families where siblings are made to sit together. They do it through stories. However it is, whichever works for you. But I think parents have a big role to play because while we want our children to learn more, be brave, be stronger, independent individuals, we also want them to have resilient, be resilient, and also be, they shouldn't break relationships so easily. I think it's very important. Just holding on to values very loosely is not fair. And I think we should, as parents, be able to teach them that too. So it works hand in hand. So, yep, that's my two bits worth.
So we have completed
Any
about over
questions?
what? No, just comments. I don't see many questions here. And I think for
Is there
paucity
any
of time,
questions? Yeah.
just some comments that are showing up. So I think for the due to paucity of time, maybe we can take one more question. Sudalini ji, I know you had a hard stop, but maybe all right. So what we can do is, I'm sure there are a lot more topics, and we had only 1 hour for today. So thank you so much for your time. Ashwini ji, I know you had a helpline number that
Yes.
you wanted to share, and Sudalini ji and Aishwarya, you had something else for our viewers for Safe Over Sorry. So maybe you can just share that, and then we can conclude today.
How nice. Thank you so much, Parvati ma'am. Thank you so much, Mohinder. It's been a pleasure to even have this conversation, and I'm always happy to see Ashwini ma'am. I keep pulling her into everything that I do as much as I can. It's such a pleasure for Sudha and me. We can say that. And one thing I'd like to leave while Sudha is going to talk about SOS briefly and how you can support this initiative. One request I would have is if you are a trusted member of a child's life, if you are a parent, then it's high time you look for some resources to get yourself trained, because a lot of times in life we don't know how to react or respond when someone comes and talks to you, confides about something. So, should anyone need help with that, we're always available, and we strongly recommend that people take structured learning for something as simple as this. It looks very simple, but it's extremely important. Sudha, would you like to say a few words about Safe Over Sorry and the initiative before we hand over to Ashwini ma'am?
Sure. Yes. Firstly, again, I think kudos to you for having this conversation, and thank you again for giving us the opportunity. Absolutely a pleasure. I just want to say that Safe Over Sorry for us is something that we've put together a lot of time and energy and effort, doing a lot of research, coming up with a workbook for children aged 4 to 7. The book is available on Amazon. It's available on our website. So for anybody, your community, especially the Kala Pradarshini community, as well as anybody watching. We're happy to give you a discount as well, just for the period of June, just to make sure that you get your hands on the book. It is an interactive, illustrated book with activities for children and parents to sit and do together. There's a copy of it. Aishwarya is holding it. So it's every kid's personal safety book. That's what we've called it. Thank you again for this opportunity. Absolutely a pleasure.
So I would
Thank you.
like to thank, Mohinder and Parvati ma'am
Thank
for
you.
organizing this event. So I just thought of sharing details regarding a helpline that we have launched. So this was largely in the context of the COVID crisis, and it is a distress helpline. But we don't want to just restrict it to the COVID-19 emotional distress helpline. Maybe you can take a screenshot, or maybe I'll also request Mohinder sir to, share across the details of this helpline to all of you. The last number that you see, 8861431673, this is a number that you can also reach out if you require any type of psychological assistance or even legal assistance if you do come across any instance of abuse, be it child sexual abuse, intimate partner violence, bullying, cyber, the abuse. So these are some of the issues that we are keenly working on. So therefore, the last number that you see, 8861431673 on the poster, you can also reach out to that particular number in case you need any support in dealing with abuse, and also support in terms of legally. We are based out of Bangalore, but we also have a network across the country. To the best of our ability, we will be able to support you. So maybe I request to share across the details to your contacts if anybody is in need of emotional support or legal support, especially in the context of violence. We could do our bit. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Definitely, and we will, on behalf of Kala Pradarshini, we will definitely post this, because I'm sure there are people out there who need this kind of helpline. And as an organization, Aishwarya, we'll reach out to you. We want to make this book available. We do want to have these sessions because this is only a start. And I think more and more people need to start having this discussion, because I think it goes back to the very first point. The number of varieties of abuses that are out there, sometimes you need someone else to teach you, to educate you about, this could also be considered an abuse. So I think this is very critical for everybody to have an open mind first. And I think, Dalini, you mentioned that, this could not happen with my child. You never know what can happen with your child. We cannot predict what is going to happen. So I think we are going to make a commitment from Kala Pradarshini, at least definitely, to take a look at the books. And I think you also mentioned that on your organization part, for every book that you sell, you actually give one of these books to another organization for an underprivileged kid. So I think that's a phenomenal activity that you do. So for our audience over here, like, if you buy one book, you're also indirectly helping one other child to have access to these sort of material and content.
And Sudha has
And
made it available in Tamil, by the way. Safe Over Sorry is for NGOs for the use of vernacular. We're working on all the languages soon, but Tamil is already almost out. So that's worked really hard on the details for Tamil. So yes, and through our collaboration with Mukta Foundation and many such NGOs, it is possible today for us to give back. With each of our books that we sell, we are able to give back as much. So thanks for mentioning that, Mohinder. I missed that.
And Ashwini ji, like, if you share your helpline number, which is not just for COVID, I think people today, mental health is one of the important topics. So we should definitely make people aware that this sort of help is actually available. They don't have to go looking; it's there. And I think people should definitely make use of something. It's not a weakness to ask for help. I think it's a strength to ask for help, to identify there is a problem. All these are strengths. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And this is just the first session. I'm sure due to paucity of time, we'll have to have a second or maybe a third. So we're really looking forward to having more such discussions with you. Thank
Thank
you
you so
and have a
much.
wonderful
Thank you,
evening.
Parvati Auntie. Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much, everyone.
Thank you.
Very much.
Bye-bye. Bye, Monica.
Bye.
Such
Thanks,
a
everyone.
pleasure.